4 years after the January 6 Capitol riots, U.S. President Joe Biden says the events should not be forgotten or rewritten. This as Congress prepares to certify Donald Trump's re-election. Well, after Biden's victory in the 2020 election, then President Donald Trump called for Congress and his vice president to block the certification, falsely claiming widespread fraud had led to his loss. Following a rally outside the White House, Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building and forced the certification to be delayed until early the next morning. Well, this Monday, lawmakers are gathering under the tightest national security level possible to certify Trump's win. That's from the November vote. Let's take a listen to Biden.
4 years ago, January 6th, this Capitol was attacked by a violent mob. If you come over to the Oval before I leave, I'll show you the room that the former president sat in for 3.5 hours watching what was going on television, the small dining room off the Oval Office. And our democracy was really, literally put to the test. And thankfully, our democracy held. But the big reason is because of the bravery of the Capitol Police and the local people who stood with us. Never forget them, they're guarding you.
Well, earlier I spoke to David Smith in Washington, D.C. He reminded us of the events of January 6, 2021.
This is always a somber anniversary in Washington and a traumatic one for people who were on Capitol Hill that day. Really the first time that America did not have a peaceful transfer of power. Of course, Donald Trump, the outgoing president, gave a speech at the Ellipse just near the White House. He really fired up that mob of his supporters. They went on to march on the U.S. Capitol and attack and assault numerous Capitol police officers, one of whom said later that it was like a war zone. She described slipping in people's blood, people throwing up. Some of them made it into the Capitol building, of course, one notably carrying the Confederate flag from the American Civil War. They even got into the Senate chamber, and they actually disrupted the certification of the 2020 election, only for a few hours in the end. Eventually, extra police did come and clear the building. You had senators, representatives, and of course, Vice President Mike Pence. They were chanting for him to be hanged. They were all in hiding, but they re-emerged, and they did, in the end, after all, rubber stamp Joe Biden's election win. Meanwhile, of course, Trump had been sitting at the White House all the while, not intervening. He did eventually belatedly issue a message telling the mob to go home. And since then, there was a massive, sprawling Justice Department investigation that led to more than 1,500 people being charged. Nearly 1,000 of those pleaded guilty. Many went to prison. But in the 4 years since then, we've heard Donald Trump trying to rewrite history, describing this as a beautiful day. And he has now promised to pardon those people who went to prison because of this, which, as you can imagine, remains a very controversial and divisive promise.